Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with today's seminar. My name is Jennifer Dill. I'm one of the faculty members who helps organize this seminar. Robert Tooney, my colleague, is not here today, so you get me. Before I forget, if there's any new students who are enrolled in this as a class, I have syllabi for you, and I'll start the sign-in sheet later. I did not have time to type one out, so you just write your name. And if you did not give me your email last week, write your email too, but otherwise just your name is fine. So today's seminar, we have Scott Bricker, who is the Youth Programs and Education Director for the Bicycle Transportation Alliance here in Portland. He is also a MERP graduate from about 4 years ago. So those of you who are in our MERP program, you too could one day
you too
in front of the cameras. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to you. It's all yours.
Thanks.
Reminders, when we are on the web live and also it'll be archived. When you speak, if you can remember to touch the button here and keep holding it until you're done speaking. Because otherwise, the people out there in webland will not be able to hear you. So try to remember to do that. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. So it's correct. My name is Scott Bricker, and I'm the Youth and Education Program Director at the Bicycle Transportation Alliance. MERP, I graduated in '98 and had a good time taking classes here. And I was actually fortunate enough to, during my MERP stay, to do some research on youth mobility and actually have a graduate assistantship working in middle schools and in Portland, working with kids. Transportation and urban planning concepts, and also bicycling. And my field area paper was on youth mobility and trying to increase mobility of children. And it was sort of a rough research, but I've stuck with it. And in the last 4 years, I've been working on trying to increase mobility for children, and it's become a little bit of a hot topic around the country. And we'll go into that a little bit more. What I'm hoping to do today is to engage everyone not only with a boring part of the talk, there will be a talk, but to actually have a multi-sensory opportunity where we're going to have a chance to write and we're going to have a chance to talk and to hopefully at the end of the presentation discuss and even have a roundtable forum where we can discuss youth mobility. And one of the reasons why I've given this talk a couple times, and one of the reasons why I structure it this way is because it's a new topic. There's not much information out there on it, not much academic research, if any, in the U.S. on it. And so any input that people have, I think, at this point is totally valid. And in fact, there is some planning that's going on around it. So while there's very little information out there, there's planning already, safe routes to school work and whatnot. So what I normally, I teach in front of kids a lot, and normally I have to, there's some way to engage them. And I've realized that the word poop is actually very effective. And I don't know if it works as well with an adult crowd. So when I started doing bike commute workshops, I used to take off my clothes, which that worked really well too. I used to go in with the helmet and the yellow rain gear and blinky lights and get up in front of it and then start taking that stuff off, pulling my pants down, and that was engaging. But yeah, and then people were slightly disappointed when I had a suit underneath or something. But so exactly, live on the internet. So what I decided to do instead is to try and do a little bit more of an academic setting exercise, and that's called drawing. I have extra paper and pen and writing utensils if people don't have, but you basically need a blank two-sided piece of paper. And so if you need, let me just kind of distribute a couple. Now for all of you folks on the internet, let's see. And I have writing utensils as well. Does anyone else need a piece of paper that hasn't gotten one? And does anyone need a writing utensil? Okay. We know who the students are in here, don't we? For all you people on the internet, this is going to be your opportunity to participate with us. So what we're going to do is a cognitive mapping exercise. And some of you may have read a little bit about this or done some in your time. But we're going to do a mental mapping exercise of our urban community, of our urban place. And I guess if you've been in Portland for a while, Portland would be a good one because we could all compare. If you're really fairly new to Portland, do the urban place you know best as an adult. But as you are an adult right now, I'm going to give you all 3 minutes to do a mental map, and this is going to be something where you're going to have an opportunity to present it, or you'll actually be forced to present it to your neighbor. So you want to be able to say, here's my city or my urban area as I know it as an adult. And then within that, you might create some sort of framework, and I don't want to give too much away. You might create some sort of framework, and within that, then you might want to give your house. You might want to put a couple locations that are near and dear to you, maybe your commute to work. But you want to have a drawing of your urban framework, so when you show it to someone, you could be like, look, this is Portland. You know, I can give something away by like, look, the Willamette River, right? I mean, like if I was going to draw a mental map, I would probably put the Willamette River in there. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes on this. Does anyone have a sense of what I'm talking about, or no clue at all? Sort of a clue? Okay, well, cognitive map really is just your mental, is this sort of your mental recollection or understanding of your place. So of anything, of PSU, you have your urban, your mental map of it, and you're like, okay, I know where all the coffee shops are, and that's like the most important part. As well, if you're a driver and you go up to, say, Seattle, your mental map of between here and Seattle might just be I-5 north. If you don't have a car and you're a train user, your mental map is going to be more of the route along the way. And if you're blind, it's going to even be more difficult to have much of a mental map in the sense of what you see, but you might have even things you hear and smell. But it's basically your mental representation of your urban environment. That's all I'm going to give you. And if you mess up, it's okay. But I'm going to give you 3. If you mess up, you get an F. So you get 3 minutes. Use the whole side of the paper, and then we'll call it back to order. Yeah. Did you get that? Okay, I guess for the people on the internet, they can hear this too. Yeah, you're going to do your mental map of the Portland metro region or your Portland experience. And realizing that we have only 3 minutes, you can just, use lines and stick figures. And I also want you to put your north arrow in there. Okay, 1 more minute. Okay, so wrap it up. And educational, yes? Flip over the paper now. This time we're going to do the same exercise, but everyone, including you people on the internet, close your eyes for just a second and think back. You can, I'll try and close my eyes, but I might fall. Think back to when you were 10. So remember where you grew up, the name of your hometown, which house specifically, if you were, choose some. Okay, don't close your eyes if you don't want to. I see a lot of people didn't follow that direction. But I'm trying to get. I'm trying to get you to think back to when you were 10 years old, 4th grade, where you grew up, your house, your family, your dogs, whatever, this and that, your school. Think about your mental map of 10. Think about maybe where you went, where you played, especially on your own. What you really knew about your place, your city, your town, whatnot. And I'm going to give you a little less than 3 minutes this time to draw that.
Even if that wasn't Oregon?
Doesn't matter. No, anywhere. Yeah, wherever it was. Try and draw your north arrow on that as well.
No.
All right, cool. So go. No, it's all right. Hi. So you both kind of come in the middle of an exercise. Just kind of wait it out, and you'll get a chance to participate. Actually, I can just tell you what we're doing is cognitive mapping. We're drawing our mental maps of our place. So we started with doing it now as an adult, like of Portland, and now we're doing when we were 10 years old, or like 4th grade, and what that was like. So just think about those a little bit. Add things that were your favorite things at the time. Maybe it was a big tree or a smell or a neighbor's house or whatever works for you. Yeah, and you could also consider your journey to school if that was significant. Okay, 1 more minute. Okay, so what I want you guys to do, that was a short minute, I know, is to share. I want you with at least one neighbor. It might be best if we just had groups of 2, just for time's sake, although we have an hour and a half, right? So I'm going to extend this part as long as possible. Is that what we have? How long?
Let's say an hour and 20 minutes.
An hour and 20 minutes, okay. So I want you to share with a neighbor, and if you haven't done it, maybe have groups of 2 or 3 at most. And I want you to spend each a minute on each side of your paper. So each person gets 2 minutes. 1 minute on your adult, 1 minute on your kid size. Just talk about it.
He drew Alexandria, Egypt.
Cool. Where's that?
Yeah. You recognize it, right?
That's Alexandria.
Yeah, that's where I live. That's where I work. That's the new library. That's where I like to go every day in the morning. And so
There was also there was one large trail that ran through to where was your
Because I have a type of direction and I'm like, okay.
Hey, remember to keep it brief. Okay, 2 more minutes. So switch. Okay, 1 more minute. Make sure you get a chance to talk about both your kid and your adult place.
So where's your cognitive map?
Where's mine? Yeah, exactly. Got it.
Yeah, I have not been back. That's probably why.
Okay, so I'm interested in hearing. Where'd this screen go? This screen disappeared. There it is. I'm interested in hearing people's feedback or things that they sort of noticed or learned in their sharing, but also drawing of their cognitive maps. Anyone? Okay, I have a question. Who was able to figure out their north arrow in their kid cognitive map? So half, maybe, or a little.
I figured it out, but I didn't have a sense of it then.
Didn't have a sense of it then. I still don't know. Like literally, like where my north arrow is from my old home back in the suburb of wherever, New York. Any feedback? Any differences between your adult and kid maps? Yeah, Jerry.
Yeah, I mean, the adult map for me is much more focused on what a map looks like.
Oh.
Whereas as a kid, I mean, I'm just focused on places I could go to and just much more selective, and also certain places that I was driven to, I just couldn't tell you how I got there. I just was transported there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, okay. Uh-huh.
What I noticed from the people that I talked with was that in our childhood, we were all extremely close in proximity to everything that was around us, be it anything that we wanted to go to or we had to go to. Everything was within blocks.
Okay.
As far as the city impression of Portland, where everything seems to be more, everything is out there. It's always you have to travel farther, you have to have more means in which to get to where you go.
Was that a land use issue, like you lived in a dense neighborhood, or was it an issue that the things that you chose to want to go to, whether it was your friend's house or whatever, were close by? You get what I'm asking?
In our childhood, I would say that it was not really, I think for them it might have been more density. For me, I grew up in a very small town, so it really wasn't density, it's just that we were a small town.
It's where you were. Okay, yeah, really good feedback. Any other comments? I wonder, yeah.
The other thing is, I remember as a kid, there were certain barriers you just didn't go across. Like there was the four lane road. You just didn't travel across.
Yeah, kind of like a river. It's like, you can't get across it, or a cliff. I wonder how many people's of Portland map, and I just did this in the last seconds of this activity, looked something like this, where I know it's kind of vague, where this is 405 and I-5 and this is blue and 26 and 84. with the Willamette, and you can't even see the Columbia River. It's off the screen. Did anyone have that kind of a framework perspective, at least, where they had, whether it was defining it by the freeway, maybe some rivers and things like that? Your kid map, as I've heard a little bit in my perspective, has a lot more to do with specific locations within your community. Maybe it was a tree or your friend's house or the place that you went to. And there's a couple reasons for this. Kevin Lynch was one of the people who really did a lot of work on cognitive mapping and working with kids and talking about what their environment was like, and did a lot of it with urban kids. But he found that the kids, especially some of the younger kids, they like to find like the nooks and crannies in their community. Like they would go to the places that the adults didn't necessarily go. And I know that happened with me. Like when I went travel to my friend's house, I would go through the woods. If I had to take the route my parents took, it would have been 7 miles. And the route I took was like 2, because I just cut through the woods and we had to go all the way out and around, because we live in the suburb. So I knew places that they didn't know about. So he found that a lot of kids, their perception of their environment was much more, it was sort of this visceral perception of their close-by community. It was places they could walk to, places that they can climb around and whatnot. Where adults, especially when we find ourselves not walking and biking, a lot of adults that say drive a lot, whatnot, they don't get a lot of those sensory perceptions, and their perceptions are more based on their transportation networks. And it really has to do with your active travel. So if you're active traveling, then you get to experience your place and you learn that place. If you're in the back of a bus or if you're getting carted around by people, you're going to be less likely to actually mentally record your environment, which totally makes sense. And again, on another note, if you're a bus user, and you don't own a car, you're probably not going to know where all the freeway exits are in your community, and you're going to know the routes that you go on. There's also an issue of home range that Kevin Lynch talks about. And home range is really it's a factor of age as well, and a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about is a factor of age. And home range is basically your desire and your actual taking action on it to go away from your home. When you're like 4, you don't really have much of a home range, or even when you're 7 or 8. Psychological studies have shown that when you're more like 10, or maybe approaching the age of 10, you start to actually desire to go further. And then obviously as you're an adult, you really desire to go further, because a lot of our locations, whether it's the mountain or whatever, there's a lot of destinations we go to that aren't, that are totally different than children. So what I'm hoping to do for this discussion is to lay out, to kind of cover some of the points that we've already kind of noticed with our cognitive map. And I hope you could bring this cognitive map exercise into a conversation that I want to have at the end of my presentation. What I'm hoping to do is give like a 20-minute presentation and then have a roundtable discussion around youth mobility issues. This is the first time I've done it in sort of an academic setting. I've mostly done it at conferences where I've talked to a variety of people, from teachers to planners to whatnot. I think one of the aspects I'm interested in today is there academic stuff that goes on about this, but also how it pertains to the planning profession. How what we just even experienced with our mapping, how that goes into planning, and how do planners have to consider the transportation of youth. And I guess that I want to say that for me, I have this feeling that youth mobility is inherently important. But I think that should be a discussion here as well. Is that important? And there's, when we look at some of the data that's out there, mostly the NPTS data, that looks at household movement, I think you're going to find that it's based on the household movement is often based on economic factors. There's actually, I've talked to some people who've done there are some researchers out there who are looking at this, and they've talked about the fact that sometimes kids will be brought on trips because it's more economically reasonable for the household to bring your kid shopping than it is to get a babysitter, even if the kid doesn't necessarily want to go shopping. Maybe they do, but it's not necessarily about their preference always. So I think that some of this has to do with sort of the inquiry of like, is youth mobility important? And then it's, how does it impact planning? And specifically, we're going to look at some transportation facilities. And I'm going to throw out some concepts of, so here are some of the ideas that I think that are good for youth mobility, and I'd like some feedback on that too. So does that make sense? Is that kind of a right way to take this? Okay. My experience is that, and the experience of what I understand, at least in the city of Portland, is that transportation is a really important factor for people's interest in livability. Let's just call it livability, but their home place. In a citywide survey that's been done, I think an annual survey, it might be a city-county survey, the top three of the top four concerns are all transportation-based. It's about, where is it here? Traffic calming, bicycle safety, and pedestrian safety. And the fourth was affordable housing. And these are, they asked all the different types of questions, from healthcare, health services, whatnot. Three of the top four were about their community, their urban living. And we see the trend, obviously, of people moving out to the suburbs and people desiring to have what I think, let's say a cul-de-sac neighborhood, a lot of people will cite that they want a low traffic community. And that's going to be an important factor in where they live. They're going to put a lot of eggs in that basket when they're thinking about their economic decisions or just their locational decisions. One of the only problems for youth mobility, obviously, is that suburban style living doesn't necessarily provide the connections to other places. So you might have a safe street, but you don't necessarily have a safe connection because you have to cross a 4-lane street, which is important. And I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing a resurgence in kind of the traditional style interest in bicycling and walking in traditional styles. People might desire to bike and walk around, and you're going to find it's easier to do that in a denser urban environment. Let's see here. So I think I'm going to have to stand over here to operate this. This is one of my favorites. So obviously, there's been some interesting things going on. Possibly post-World War II, the field of transportation planning and land use, and this is basic history of planning stuff, has gone to an automobile-dominated type community.
Is that real?
I got it off the internet. I think it's real. It could be fake, but no, I think that's real. And yeah, sure. It's real. So while the trend has been to provide automobile facilities, and that really being the priority for the communities, there's been a new, as I had mentioned before, a new kind of resurgence in interest in planning for kids. As I'd mentioned, that was something I just luckily fell into, I think, when I was doing my field area paper as a MERP and doing my graduate assistantship. But since then, the Safe Routes to School movement that started in Europe 20 years ago has really had spread around the country, around the world, has come to the U.S. And there is some interest in work being done in that. But I think it's still barely cracking the profession. It really hasn't changed much engineering or planning as we see it. One of my goals, sort of my first goals when out of grad school, was I wanted to be a youth mobility planner, but there was none. So that's one of my goals, is to actually have that. And I think we're actually seeing some of that when communities that have Safe Routes to School funding. You're seeing a lot of health people serving as conduits to giving out funding for Safe Routes to School grants and whatnot. And those people, in some ways, are serving as youth mobility folks. Either way, these initiatives have actually been important. They've been a driving fact in a lot of the bicycle and pedestrian advocacy, which is what I do my professional work in. And they are uniting a diverse group of folks. Again, health folks are a group of people that planners can now sort of work with and say, oh, we want to build a community that's going to make us healthy, as well as get us around. We have a health person back here. Thank you for coming. See what's going on there. Let me just use the arrows. Okay. Either way, as I mentioned before, I intrinsically believe that for children, mobility for them is important. That it's a good thing. That it's something that we should strive to provide for them. And for them, I think they also think it's a good thing. If you ever go bike riding with kids, and you'll see lots of pictures, I do, bike riding with kids, they love it. It's a great thing for independence for them. It's healthy. It also, it's shown, activities shown to improve their academic scores, whatnot. But if you talk to a parent of an 8-year-old, they might be a little bit more concerned about letting their child go play in traffic. On the other hand, for adults and in the community, it's a big burden. There's been studies that have shown that 20% of the AM peak traffic now is to take kids to school. And it might be a trip chain type of thing. I don't think it's fully understood, but it's a significant factor in people's lives, carting their kids around, obviously the Sunday soccer moms and all that. It's also as a community. If you live in front of a school and now there's cars flooding your neighborhood trying to get kids in and out of school, it's a big issue in the community, and as well as it pertains to transportation professionals. The current Hubbub, I think, has really been around this sort of idea of getting kids around, but there's been very little work on trying to figure out how do we do it. What are the safe routes look like? Are there planners out there who are actually saying, I'm going to be a kid today, and I'm going to figure out what's going to be the way to get myself around? I think that we haven't really broken out of that box of whatever is traditional, and I know bicycle and pedestrian planning is never necessarily traditional. We're always looking to Europe or other places. We haven't really broken out of that box, I believe. Do kids prefer a low-traffic facility where there are no cars, or do they prefer more of a traditional bicycle lane scenario? And most of these pictures are Portland. There are some that are out of Portland. How do we measure this, and what is the current research is some of the stuff that I'm interested in. I think starting off with the definition of mobility as given by the DOT is a good place to start. The U.S. DOT defines mobility, I'll read off the screen, as the ease by which desired social and economic activities can be reached from a specific point in space. And in fact, there's a report that I really don't like, but I like to use it in my presentations, called Mobility 2001, and is by the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, funded by the automobile industry. I don't know if somehow that oxymoron exists, but their definition of mobility says that there's the increased accessibility requires a higher mobility, being able to travel further distances. And a lot of the work on mobility that's currently going on, or that's really been pressed, has had to do with distance. It's had to do is, can we travel further? And the further we can travel means the more mobile we are. So we're actually more mobile now that we can fly everywhere. But as it goes to the urban planning, I think that mobility has been directly linked to ability to travel further. It continues to say that distance impedes accessibility, and mobility is the ability to overcome the distance. That automobiles provide the highest level of accessibility. While this report focused on distance, we've actually heard a little bit from our cognitive maps that as a kid, distance isn't necessarily the issue you're looking at. You're looking at places that you want to go to. My perspective is that, for a kid, it's much more important to have access to, your neighborhood school park, or a friend's house or a local store than it is to have complete access to the entire region, which is the type of mobility that we're trying to provide today. Independent mobility, it's tied to a number of factors. It's definitely tied to land use, being able to walk to your friend's house. It's tied to the ability to travel. Age is a very important factor in this, and I think that urban planners have to recognize age and even study age a little bit when they're looking at youth mobility. When we think about drivers, we think that anyone who has ability to drive a car actually has accessibility to the entire network, and there's no actual physical barriers besides congestion or maybe pricing to not being able to own a car. But if you can own a car, the idea is that you can travel anywhere. And again, something like congestion is the issue. When you're a kid, it has a lot more to do just about your ability. If you're a 4-year-old, you just really can't travel around. And so you have to look at the difference of age and decide what type of travel networks you're going to try and create and what age that's going to link up to. And I think that's actually really important. I do a lot of my work in bicycle issues, and bicycling provides obviously a greater ability to travel greater distances, and it also warrants a different age planning, different age benchmark than, say, pedestrian planning, I think would, because there's going to be more 6-year-olds walking than you'd see biking around the community. As also was mentioned, there are certain areas for kids that are just flat out barriers they can't cross. It might be the 4-lane street. It might, there's certain areas, like, and this is actually an area where they just recently built a bike path, but you can't cross the freeway as a kid. So as looking at kids' mobility, you have to look at some of those major barriers too, and either how to overcome them or just to not worry about them. You have to figure out what you're going to do. This, to me, leads to the sort of the definition and the idea of what is youth mobility. And I've defined youth mobility as the independent travel by kids using appropriate travel networks to move between important locations such as schools, parks, homes, friends' houses, etc. Again, I'm trying not to focus on distance, but to focus on the important locations for the kids. Again, ability is an important factor. And what I've done here in this slide is to try and list out some of them. Again, this is stuff that I wouldn't say the research necessarily exists so much, but stuff that I've sort of created either through my research or just through my work, that audience identification and age is going to be the most important factor if you're trying to provide youth mobility. Cognitive development and training impacts the ability to use the network, as we've already sort of gone through. Piaget, who is a really important and distinguished psychology academic, has done research that says there's certain places in your life where you can do certain things, or that people tend to do certain things. I mentioned before that 10 years old is the age where kids tend to want to travel further, and at the same time they have adult operations. They start being able to see the same field of vision that adults can see, where a 6-year-old or 7-year-old has a smaller field of vision. They can actually use their body, their reaction times and their perceptions of things like speed are actually adult-like at 10. Doesn't mean that, or they start to begin adult-like. Doesn't mean that they can make the same decisions that we can make, but it means that they're actually physically able to use the system. Home range also impacts the trip length, and kids at the age of 10 start increasing their home range. The lack of interest in time of money is something that this might be something that we can talk about later. I haven't really fleshed it out very much in this presentation, but most of our current planning for trip planning and modeling bases a lot of our decisions based on about time and money, about whether it's the amount of time that you're going to take and whether or not you're going to take the bus or not take the bus, or all those things that go into transportation planning. For kids, I argue that time and money are very unimportant. They're not something that kids deal with very often. I mean, you can see kids hanging outside of a middle school. I did yesterday actually for 45 minutes waiting for their parents to come, and I don't think that you would see many adults really being willing to deal with that. The same, and then as we had talked about before, where parents are going to be more likely to not, as a household, not necessarily consider the value of their kids' time as the time of their children as valuable, but they would their own. So you're going to bring your kid along on certain trips where because they can't babysit themselves, and you're not going to pay for a babysitter or whatnot. I think that a lot of the work that we do around modeling and looking at how we determine transportation decisions are based on time and money, and I do think that kids don't really think about that very much. And even rich kids. It doesn't differ between rich kids and poor kids so much. As opposed that they focus on fun. And I've talked about this with a number of people. It's like, could we create a network, a transportation network of fun transportation network, a scary transportation network, where like the kids walk down the street and they get scared, and they're like, I love this street, I get scared, like not a bad kind of scary, but like a Halloween kind of scary, I mean, kids like that kind of stuff. Is there any way you could actually engage the kids? And that might be going overboard, but I think it's a funny idea. And then, of course, parental intervention is something that parents don't have to deal with. Your parents say, no, you can't go there by yourself. And this is, okay, that's too bad. There's some data. This is from a woman named Tracy McMillan, who's in UC Irvine. She's a PhD candidate. And the next 3 slides are hers. But basically what she said about the data out there is that there's really not much data. And there's some data that's gone on through some of the Safe Routes projects or some household travel diaries. Rarely is the data directly measured. The only data that she's really uses, she's more on the academic side where she's really trying to figure out, she's working with a lot of the numbers, and I profess in not having done that. She uses the Nationwide Personal Transportation Survey because they actually go to the age 5 years old. They actually report, they ask the households to report ages 5 and up. So there is information about trips there. And the fact is that there actually is a lot of local data, but it's hard to find, it's hard to collect. There's schools are doing trip surveys, and there's diaries going home in schools and different projects, but it's not really recognized in the transportation field, and it's hard to collect. And the other issue is that most of the information focuses on school trips, but if you look at what the trips for kids are, this is NPTS data, the trips that are being made, there's only 25% of the trips of kids are being made to school. So the other 75% of the trips are actually an important piece of this puzzle that currently isn't being looked at as much. Safe routes to school is the main focus. Getting to school is the main focus. It's a good focus, but the issue is that for kids, recreational, social is an important issue. Also, just by mode, just to sort of show you, most of the trips that kids make are in their parents' occupying a vehicle where their parents or someone else is driving them around. School buses take kids around, kids walk. You'll see in the other, which is basically bicycle, that there is significantly more bicycling trips at the older age. And again, I think that kind of makes sense. You're going to see younger kids walking and more older kids biking. Yeah, let's leave that. So I want to kind of change the gear a little bit and just talk about facilities. So we've kind of tried to cover a little bit about what might impact youth transportation, a little bit about the data. I'll run through some facility slides and see if people have anything that they want to contribute. And I hope so, actually, because this is the type of audience that I'm really trying to get some feedback on about these issues. I believe that the presence of automobiles really impacts and in some ways defines mobility for children or the ability for them to use the street. This facility, as we all know as our wonderful Esplanade, is a place where you can walk pretty much without worry about getting hit by a car. The freeway next to it, maybe not. But the fact is, while it doesn't necessarily serve a great transportation route for kids, is that it depicts a situation that I see all the time. I see kids of all ages riding around the park, riding their bikes in the park, riding around or being in places where there are no automobiles. And as it changes, residential streets, collector streets, arterial streets, highways, freeways, you're going to see less and less kids on those facilities. There's a report from the European Commission called Kids on the Move, which I love, and I use a lot for the quotes. But basically, they talk about the fact that, I'll read it. At the urban level, should be, of course, it is on the major roads and cycling routes that bicycle journeys are permitted and encouraged. The most logical approach would be to equip the major roads with cycling facilities while at the same time doing as much as possible to develop a parallel network of calm cycling routes, relying in particular on local streets through the various neighborhoods. I believe that also pertains to kids. I think that having one of the networks, one of the treatments that I really like, at least for bicycling, is called the Bicycle Boulevard. And this is on Alameda Hill in northeast Portland, but they're actually all over Portland. Portland uses the Bicycle Boulevard a good deal, which restricts automobile access, but it doesn't impact access or mobility for automobile users. It just provides certain designated streets as you can't go there if you're a car, or at least you can't go there from here. And in fact, this situation, I believe that, you can see that in the next slide, the car is coming up it's possible that that car may have been going on the street or routed slightly differently if the street that this bicyclist wasn't on wasn't a bicyclist-only street. There are some specific treatments that you can do in the front of major intersections, like a bike box, and it's hard to see, but in the distance, there's also the do not enter except for bicycles. And that kind of treatment facility really provides a haven for transportation users, for bicycle and pedestrians. I also think that it might, and I haven't done any research on this, it could increase the value of those homes on that street. I mean, if it's the goal to have low traffic in front of your house, this might be something that's actually good for that street, even though they don't have the full level of automobile accessibility to 39th Avenue, which we're seeing right there. Another treatment, Ladd's Addition. Ladd's Addition is a favorite bicycling place of Southeast Portlanders, and you can just cruise right through Ladd's Addition, cross 21st Avenue, and you're just cruising, and there's no cars. Here's another. Actually, the city of Portland has started to do some safe routes to school work, and some of the things that they're doing are very minor improvements, low-cost improvements to improve the circulation of cars around schools. And they've made a bunch of schools have a 4-block one-way network where you can only go one way around the school, and they don't prevent cars going the other way, but they do prevent bikes. So you can actually go both ways. And then some other things, obviously, like some simple things like pedestrian and bicycle buttons to cross major streets. And then this is actually, is this where I'm going? No. And then obviously off-street facilities are another really great way, and they use a lot of off-street facilities in Europe. As opposed to getting kids around this way, I like to get kids around this way, but as you can see here, this is a fairly aggressive move by these kids to take this route. One thing I've observed at schools where there's lots of school buses and cars, this is in the West Hills, is that the access points, there are a lot of points of conflict where you have buses, where you have cars, where you have bikers, you have pedestrians, and it's fairly dangerous. This is the kind of situation that I think you're going to try and avoid as a planner. If you're going to do any sort of site planning, you're going to try and locate bike racks and locate pedestrian access in a slightly different place than you would locate automobile circulation. And you see that actually in a lot of new schools. I visited Florida where my parents moved to, and I visited some of the schools there, and they actually have like one side of the school is cars, and one side of the school is bikes and pedestrians. And it actually works pretty well. And they also stop the cars. They have the cars in a line. They stop them, and they let all the pedestrians and golf carts and other things go first, and then the cars get to go through. And the people who are picking up their kids are sometimes waiting online for 15, 20 minutes. And it's a big part of their day. And I think that's why this is another reason why this is important, is it really does impact the adults' daily lives, the parents' daily lives. This is the last design approach that I really think is important. And this is kind of the not on the map approach. I think that, as we had talked about in the cognitive map, kids find the nooks and crannies. They go through the back alleys and the paths. This is in Hillsborough, where the school is on the other side of this neighborhood, and you can see the pedestrian crossing sign, the crosswalk, and where that fire hydrant is actually a path that goes through the neighborhoods and connects to this dirt path where there's an elementary school in the foreground, and in the near background, and the far background there's a high school. And I actually find that this type of facility, I'm going to move past this one, is actually one that's really well used by kids. This is another example in Hillsborough where you have these houses, this subdivision that was created behind a school, and they've, instead of putting a fence up, they didn't have a fence, so they let kids commute from their homes right there through that hole in the fence by the school. Or actually, these kids were taking a slightly different route because it was more direct. But those kids commuted using that field. And I actually think that places like that are really important places that planners have to actually have on their radar screen. So you have your map of your inventory of sidewalks and whatnot, but you're actually talking about for kids that they're going to be potentially using other types of facilities. And I just have a couple slides in here about bike rack parking, and I think that that's important to make them visible, but it's not essential to this presentation. So seeing the city and the traffic through the eyes of a child can indeed be an eye-opener. We need to consider the situation from a child's point of view, And then having relinquished our adult powers, we could begin to understand the extent to which our towns and cities are beset with the pitfalls for our own children. That same European Union report. And they're a bunch of happy kids. I do have a couple, just really quickly, a couple more data slides from Tracy at UC Irvine and that I stole, and I'll just show them to you. Did I already show this one? Okay, yeah, so this is walking to school by mode, showing that the high amount of parents driving their kids to school, and that it decreases as kids get older, and kids actually potentially have the ability to get there on their own. And then she'd done some regression, I guess, on barriers to bicycling and walking to school, showing that long distances, which makes sense, is the number one barrier. Traffic danger was shown to be the second barrier. And then things down the line, adverse weather conditions, crime danger, school policy, other reasons. It does say that kids with no barriers were 6 times more likely to walk or bike to school than their peers. And I think that that's a really interesting point, too. So that's the end of this slide presentation. And so what I've done in the past, I've actually done the cognitive mapping after it to wake people up, but I tried it this way this time. I guess what I'm interested in is if this is actually a topic that people are interested in, to see if you have any feedback about how is this important? Is this something that planners should be considering? Is there research ideas that should come out of this? What might be next steps? What do people think about some of the ideas about that I've shown? Any of the ideas? I'm interested in hearing some feedback. Yeah.
Aside from bicycles and planning bicycle lanes, what some of the other methods that kids have to get around scooters, skateboards, and that kind of thing, are those types of things accounted for in bicycle plans, youth awareness, or youth transportation plans? That kind of thing?
Well, youth transportation plans are something that are a very new breed. And I would say that I'm not sure. I would say that most city transportation plans don't really do much on that, although I know in the city of downtown Portland there's the skateboard network. So they've actually, I don't know any other city that's done that. Generally, I don't think so, although when we talk about youth mobility, I do think we need to include those. And I tend to focus on bicycling because that's where I come from professionally, and also because it provides the greatest ability to travel the greatest distances for kids. But I definitely think that other routes, other modes should be considered. And I do think that if we make the streets friendly for biking and walking, that the streets will probably be friendly for skating, scooting, hippity hopping, and pogo sticking as well. So, yeah.
Could you push the buttons and hold it down while you're different touch?
Have you been working with, with the school districts where now there's a movement toward making mega campuses and larger schools where, gets things farther away from residential area, and where there'll be tendency to do more auto trips, and where the smaller school that closer proximity to the neighborhoods, and where there is more chances for the youth to travel by bicycle or other modes of transportation.
So school siting issues?
Right.
Okay. School siting is a huge concern, and it's one that I don't really think, and people definitely correct me if I'm wrong, that transportation planners have spent much time on. And I'm not in the sense in the past. And I do think that, I know in the advocate world, there's interest in trying to put some restraints on school siting policy, trying to make sure it's biking and walkable, whatnot. At the same time, the school districts, they want the biggest piece of land for the least cost so they can provide a nice large facility with fields and all the accommodations that they hope to offer their kids. And I think a lot of people choose those schools. A lot of households probably choose to say, okay, I want the new school in this place. So I think that, yes, there's a really strong interest And if anyone has other info on this, feel free to kick in. And what I'm really hoping is people want to just kick in at any time they can. And that there's a strong interest in kind of figuring out those issues. But at this point, it's kind of I don't know if it's a public policy issue, or I'm not exactly sure where it stands. It's just something that schools choose where they're going to locate, and we're sort of hoping for the best at this point. Yeah.
I've heard data that children in lower income neighborhoods are much higher risk. I would think that transportation planning for youth would put a priority on areas in lower income areas, and I'm wondering if you've found that to be true as well.
Risk of traffic crashes, or risk of I don't know if I know that data. I'm sure I don't know that data. Basically, my information about transportation-related crashes is that, well, first of all, transportation-related crashes are the number one cause of death and major injury of all Americans ages 1 to 29. There's different studies that show that up to 34. There's a major impact on our youth, and that's because people don't really die before their age of 30 for very many causes, except for getting hit by a car. I don't know how that really pertains to low-income areas versus high-income areas. My sort of standpoint is that really putting your kid in the car might be the most dangerous thing that you can do for them. At the same point, maybe just traveling is the most dangerous thing that you can do. I don't know the data between high and low income. Sorry to say, yeah.
I've heard people talk about kids becoming increasingly isolated, doing all structured activities and not going and playing in the neighborhood with their friends.
Mm-hmm.
And now even more than 20 years ago. And I was wondering how mobility kind of fits into that, or if you have any ideas about that.
Yeah, I think that that's a big part of this discussion. The places where I've given this presentation in the past has been to bicycle advocates and bicycling planners and education professionals and whatnot, and they're all screaming for kids to be able to bike and walk and for health reasons. So there's a huge health issue. This over 60% of Americans are overweight or obese. In childhood, overweight and obesity is just rising, as well as chronic diseases that come from inactivity, or one of the main causes are inactivity. So there's a lot of people out there, and that's why the whole health sector is on board with this. In fact, the National Centers for Disease Control is really behind Walk Your Child to School Day and Safe Routes to School issues. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which is the largest healthcare foundation, health-giving foundation in the country, has been giving substantial amounts of money in the last 2 years for these types of programs. So a lot of people are looking at it as a health issue. They're drawing the connection between not being able to go out of your home, not being able to bike and walk to places, and the health of the children. And other people are looking at it as other issues. Academic learning. If your kids, when they're not active, they're often that actually it impacts their academic performance. So yeah, I think there are direct connections, and it's still this kind of slippery, loose issue. It's the way that it's being approached right now is getting media on it. A couple days ago, there was media. It was covered front page in a couple different newspapers about the increasing obesity of Americans. It's really getting the information out there. But it's hard to say, don't play the video game. We're trying more to create opportunities and to do promotional activities to engage the community. So, yeah, if that answers the question. And we'll come back.
In one of your slides, you showed, I think it was Sabin School, that has the streets around it that are one way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering if any communities or schools had attempted to take these infrastructure facilities, roads, and adjust them by peak time. Like, for instance, certain roads are just bicycles during
Mm-hmm.
peak times of commute for kids. And then other times cars can go on those roads, kind of like a peak pricing congestion, schema that would work for cars on some freeways. I mean, there would be no, obviously there'd be no cost to it, but there would be a cost in that cars who pick up their children would have more time because there'd be less roads. So maybe might encourage more bicycling.
I don't know. I think that's a really good idea, and I'll ask around for some people. I mean, this is the kind of, even the ideas like this are the kind of things that people are searching for, because what's happening is that people are creating student transportation plans. They're doing these exercises. Safe Routes to School program does a bunch of things, but one of the things it does is it works with the school to create a student transportation plan that says, these are the safe routes to school, these are the dangerous routes to school, and there you go. And no one's looked at, like, how do kids get around, what are their travel behaviors like, and I think because of that, you haven't really seen very many innovative solutions like that. I know that, I'm familiar with certain freeways where they've done that, like in Seattle on some of the bridges, I think, the major bridges crossing the lakes, where they've made, in peak direction, it's 3 lanes, and non-peak direction is 2 lanes, and it changes. So I think that, obviously that kind of technology is out there. I'm sure there might be some compliance issues if you just had a sign that said, don't drive here, certain hours of the day. So, I haven't really heard of that, and it's possible that in Europe, a lot of the stuff that is happening bicycle planning wise is coming from Europe. So I could ask a couple people and see if they've heard of that. That's a really good suggestion. Okay, yeah, and then I'll go to the back.
I'm down.
You're down.
Scott, with the work that you do, how are you drawing in the parents? Because it seems like kids would hear some of these ideas, and I could imagine them being like, "Yeah, cool, great, I'd like to do this." But just like you said, it's the kind of the parents' ability to intervene and say maybe no that might hold up some of this.
Yeah, again, when I've given this presentation in the past, there's been a lot of teacher-like education professionals who have kind of dabbled in a lot of different areas, kind of like myself, and it's one of the biggest issues that comes up, constantly. There hasn't really been much of a here's how you do it. This is the way. First of all, the issue of stranger danger is really out there. Stranger danger is getting attacked by someone else, and parents are very fearful of stranger danger, and statistics show that it's fairly insignificant. There's 100 kidnappings a year in the country, there's 44,000 traffic deaths or whatever. So statistically, it's not going to necessarily happen to your kid, but it could, and the fear of that is one of the things that's having people drive their kids. What we're doing programmatically is to try and include the school community, and parents, get the kids jazzed, promote it through the kids, send home information, and get the community interested in saying, we want our kids to bike and walk. And so it's more of trying to overcome some of those barriers. But a lot of it is just through communication. And what's interesting is that this has really become a cross-disciplinary issue. It's not just a transportation issue. So we're working with the school and the community to try and, you had a question back there, unless this was a thread off this. No? Okay.
Oh, actually it is.
Okay, you want to do it, and then we'll go back to you. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. All right.
What I'm wondering is, what are some of the ways you found effective in communicating these issues to those people who don't have children of their own?
And you're saying it's just the ideas of youth mobility. Youth mobility is something that isn't really talked about very much, so it hasn't really been an issue. There's very limited resources currently to offer programs, and they're really trying to spread the word on trying to make our communities more mobile, more accessible for children. And most of the work that's going on right now is through the schools. And the only way that non-parents hear about it is through media and maybe some advocacy, like through the BTA, we have a membership-based organization, we'll write about it in our newsletter. So if you're a member, you'll hear about it that way. Or it'll be in the newspaper, but currently it's really placed in the school, And that was why with the statistic of only 25% of the kids' trips are at schools is sort of at odds with the fact that this is all happening in the schools. But schools are like this captured audience. And so you can and there's lots of different things. You could, preach and teach kids. You can send information home. There's a lot of different communication networks. So that's what's going on. Yeah.
I guess my input and question actually kind of goes along with both of these is where I lived 6 years ago was in Dayton, Ohio, and back there the city had actually just relaxed ordinances for the fact of kids being able to just use the sidewalks everywhere as their mode of transportation for bike and walking. Do you feel that the relaxation of ordinances on bicycle use on sidewalks, urban or suburban, would at least help alleviate some of that problem?
I think that the major thing to alleviate the problem is to actually have a network of streets where you're restricting automobile use. That's my personal perspective. And they've done a lot of that. There are examples in Portland. On the sidewalk, sidewalks are a dangerous place to ride your bike, statistically. We don't teach, we do run a bike safety program, we don't teach riding on the sidewalk except for when crossing major intersections using the crosswalk. Or out in a country street where you don't have, maybe it's not even a sidewalk, it might just be some path off to the side. Off-street facilities, though, which is less of an urban issue, maybe more of a suburban kind of thing, are a good way to handle, are a viable facility if they can provide connections. Even off-street facilities, like a bike path, they have the issue of crossing major streets. And you don't have the right, and when you're crossing those streets, you usually don't have the right of way if you're in a bike facility. So now you're dealing with having to cross a major street coming off a bike path. So not necessarily. I would say that I'd say that having a street, in Europe there's an idea called, how do you say it, Wohnruf. Wohnruf, right?
We got some local experts on that.
Yeah, okay. And so maybe that's the kind of stuff, interested in here. People have come, other feedback. And home zone is another similar idea where it's you have a street where it's where bicycles and pedestrians are really the main mode there, and you could walk or bike pretty much anywhere. And as a car driver, you have to go really slow. I don't know, any other feedback on Wohnruf? Or it's basically a street where, yeah. And in Portland, you find that in a lot of neighborhoods. In Portland, there's a lot of neighborhoods where, people dominate the street. I live in North Portland, and it's my neighborhood, it's there's just people walk down the middle of the street. It's just, I've asked people about it, and they say it's the dogs. They don't want to get bitten by the dogs that are in the yards. But whatever it is, they're walking down the middle of the street. It's 3 14-year-old girls walking down the middle of the street. I walk down the middle of the street, and it's pretty cool because you're okay, I'm just walking in the middle of the street. And now you know that cars, at least from people from that neighborhood, know that. But when I talk about travel networks, we obviously have travel networks. There's a regional network, there's a local network, there's a hierarchy of streets. So you could have neighborhood streets, but if there's no connectivity to the places that are important to the kids, then it's not going to really be that useful. So it's taking some of the designs that probably aren't that difficult, things that we already know how to do, and creating an actual youth travel network. And it could look it wouldn't have to be the whole metro region. It could be small pockets. So, yeah, my long answer is, do you have a follow-up on that?
Well, I guess just a little bit in the fact that in the relaxation of ordinances in Dayton, I don't have figures or statistics to go with on this, but I know that the amount of injuries that were occurring from bike accidents or interaction with cars actually went down at that point.
Oh, really?
And then also expenses for infrastructure, it actually, those costs went down because they were actually able to then build, they were able to actually get variances between people's properties to connect sidewalks. And it became much more of a network in that respect. Maybe not not so much in the urban area, like the metro Dayton area, but as you got out on the periphery,
the suburban. And I actually think that those kind of connections. So I think that yes, maybe there's a yes twist, and I'd be interested in checking that out. But the connections, that one side that I'd shown, the school that was connecting the neighborhood. That was ultimately a sidewalk. I mean, it was just an off-street path. But yeah, having the connections. So as a bicycle or pedestrian, when I was a kid and my parents drove the 7 miles and then I went through the woods, you know, I think as a kid, because you can't use a car if you're going to travel independently, you don't have a license, you know, having those kind of connections that might only be bike ped only are definitely part of, I think, the answer. Yeah. Okay, I saw actually hands go up in this order. So, yeah.
I have a question about funding. Like, I was in...
Push the touch.
Okay, my question's about funding. The province of Quebec, like, it's in their official bike policy to fund, like, bicycle education programs for youth, and they have so far, like, funded them in over 50% of, like, provincial schools. So I'm wondering, like, what it is here on the federal and state and local level for funding. Like,
it's not that cool. It's the bicycle and pedestrian education funding or safe routes to school funding comes from a number of places. Mostly there actually are federal dollars that it comes from. Section 402 from T21, which is a transportation safety pot that is administered through the state DOT. Some states it's hard to find. Our state, you know, we get money, Section 402 money for the programs I run. And those funds can be used for a variety of bicycle safety, pedestrian safety types of programs. Locally, you have to go shake the money out of people, pretty much. You know, we are funded through corporations, foundations, kind of that whole route. But there's really no centralized pot besides some of these Section 402 grants. And the Section 402 is only a startup. So you're only supposed to be able to get funded for 3 to 5 years, and after that, you're not supposed to get funded anymore. So it's not even ongoing. In Oregon, this is slightly off the mark, but in Oregon we have the bicycle bill, which is no other state currently has the bicycle bill, where 1% or more of our gas tax has to go to bicycle and pedestrian projects, and that's more asphalt than it is education. In fact, it has to be asphalt. But that's an innovative thing that we have. Allison, I think your next question or comment.
I like youth mobility, of course, but I'm also a big advocate of mobility in general, and I notice we do have a changing demographic where, especially in the next 20 years, we're going to be dealing with a lot of elderly folks who are not going to be able to drive, and they'll need to get around in a similar mechanism that children do. Not saying that their cognitions are similar, but they're going to have the same needs. Do you see this as a parallel where you can use the planning to also create elder networks, not to schools, but community centers and shopping areas, place that kids would want to go as well, but also incorporating the elderly as well?
So I think that's an awesome point, yeah. I mean, I think that my sort of thing is, like, if we set the kid as the benchmark or the indicator species, then hopefully anyone else should be able to use it. And if, that circle of life, I mean, the elder and the kids fall somewhere pretty close. So, ideally, I actually think that it's possible that if our elders decided, like they do in Europe, they want to bike and walk, because in Europe there's actually countries where the biking and walking rates are higher as you get older. I mean, it's high when you're a kid, it kind of goes down when you're, 20s, 30s, 40s, and then when you're 50, 60, it starts going up. People don't want to drive, or they don't have the ability to drive, or maybe carrying a license might be more rigorous, and so you're going through the tests. But I think that actually might be a population at some point. You might actually get a group of old people saying, oh, we don't just want the signs bigger, because that's what's happening right now. There's new federal regulations making traffic signs bigger so people can see them. We want to have places where we can walk and bike, and I think it might actually be a good advocacy group. It might be,
And they've got cash. They've got money.
And they have money. Yeah, that's my field area paper. I talked about that. It was like kids don't have money or political clout or anything, and there's research out. There's some good written stuff about that. But it's like you don't see a bunch of 12-year-olds attending a $1,000 plate political dinner. And if you did, they might have a little bit more weight, and they're definitely not voting because they're not allowed. And there's a whole bunch of sort of minuses against kids actually having any political, interest. And so you wind up having adults, advocating for them, and it's weird. Like, because you don't really, I mean, I could be here talking about it, but I don't really know what they want, except for the fact that I hang out with them a lot, you know. So, okay, up here, and then I'm going to get back to you.
Two-part question. As far as your experience with children and bicycling, what age is it appropriate for children to bike on busy streets and bike lanes? And the second question is, when you advocate for bike lanes, how do you get over the hurdle that there are people, decision makers, who see bike lanes as kind of an attractive nuisance? You put a bike lane out there, and little kids are going to start weaving their way down the street and get hurt.
You're saying business owners are saying that? Okay, it's a two-part question. The first one was what age? We teach starting at the age of 10, which goes along with some of that psychology research that I had mentioned. So under the age of 10, you're talking about kids who don't have the full adult-like ability, physical ability. It's not that they should not bike or walk, but we just don't teach them, and we kind of put that more in the parents' hands. So, and also under 10, the kids are more likely to be willing to go with an elder or a parent. So, and if you're talking about really busy, I'm not sure. I try and stay off the really busy streets pretty much. I mean, on a bike lane on Broadway, like I had showed, that one 3-lane street, I mean, yeah, I'll go on that. But like Tucson, Arizona, when I visited there, and it was like 7-lane roads with bike lanes, you know, I'm an avid cyclist, and that's just not that attractive to me. I mean, I would do it, I guess, if I lived there. So I do think that bike lanes on major streets providing regional connections are essential, because you need to have that aspect of the network. I'm not saying that they're not important, but I'm saying that I would pretty much advocate that most to all children should be riding on lower traffic streets, and that might mean lower traffic streets with bike lanes, although there is a certain average daily traffic that a street has to have before they put a bike lane on it. But it's not necessarily 20,000. It might be like, I don't even know what it is, I think 5,000 or something. So over 10, 12, maybe even over 12. Second question about bicycle lanes and businesses, that I would say that it has more to do with parking. That usually when you're talking with the business, it's like you can't take out parking to put in a bike lane. And the advocacy has a lot more to do with whether or not you're removing parking as opposed to the bike lanes being next to them, at least in my experience in Portland. I'm not as sure about other communities. So it becomes sort of an advocate's perspective of, you know, do you want bicyclists to come in front of your business and whatnot and remove parking from one side of the street? Interstate Max planning went in. We were on the citizens working group, and bike lanes, you know, we battled for bike lanes and all this other stuff. There is a section of Interstate Max line that we said, okay, like we're willing to lose the battle because the businesses won't accept not having parking in front of, this is like a 5-block strip on Interstate. And in fact, the bankers were saying, we're not going to lend money to do reconstruction of buildings, or you know, if there's no parking in front of this, we're not going to even touch it. So sometimes it's like so ingrained in the equations that are used that you have to let it go. But in Oregon, another part of the bike bill is that any new facility that's built must provide bicycle and pedestrian access unless there's, you know, an alternative route or unless there's no need. So most major streets that are rebuilt or overlaid or whatnot, there's going to be bicycle lanes on them. Hope that answers your question. Yeah.
You actually answered part of the question, but I'm just interested. We imagine ourselves as children, and let's take a 10-year-old child. When I was 10 years old, I didn't care about driving on the side of the road, and I didn't really care about safety, to tell the truth. But that's just my perception. If your experience when you talk to children, what is their reaction, their perception on safety, and do they want more mobility or do they care? That's what I'm.
Yeah, I think parents are a lot more concerned about safety than kids are. I mean, I didn't start wearing a bike helmet till I was 22. I'm like, and the time I decided I should wear a bike helmet was I went mountain biking once, and like I crashed like 6 times. I mean, I was just, I don't know, it was a bad day or like it was a really hard course, and I almost split my head open. And at some point I was like, wow, I could really kill myself. I better start doing this. I think that kids don't really think that much about it. And kids are fairly indestructible, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't be concerned. I am personally, if I lived in Europe, I wouldn't care about bike helmets, for example, to travel around. I think that around Portland I wear mine because of the way I'm riding and the type of bike I'm riding and how fast I'm riding and whatnot. But in general, it's like I think that as a society, we're probably a little more concerned about safety as it goes with just general bumps and bruises and cuts and scrapes, as opposed to, but people can get run over by cars, on a fairly regular basis, and it's not that big of an issue. So I actually think that the issue of safety, this is kind of going, a little bit off my normal, straight line that I have to walk, is that I don't think safety is that big of an issue, but I do think that the interaction between automobiles and people who are on bikes or walking or whatnot is a really big issue. And I think that kids might, if there were other routes to take that got them there quickly, I think that kids do take them when they learn about them. And the same with adults. I think that adults, when they learn that there's a low traffic alternative, that they'll take it. So I actually think that while they're not that concerned about safety, it's more pleasant for them and they actually like it. They like to be able to swerve around and whatever. As it goes for mobility, I also think that kids aren't necessarily taught by their families and still that mobility is an important value. And when we take kids biking, our bike safety program, it's a 10-hour program. We take kids on bike rides. It's like this very intensive program. And we've taught it to over 10,000 kids in Oregon. I don't really teach that much anymore. I do more administration. But we find that when kids go on a route where they didn't even realize, like, oh, we're going to like Columbia Park, and they're like, what? Like, you're crazy. And like 10 minutes later, we're there, And they're just like, oh my God! Like, so their eyes get opened, by the understanding that they could actually get places. Because I don't think that kids have as much of that exploration, the ability even to explore it. They have that freedom. So yeah, I do think that when they get it, they really like it. Yeah. Cool. Any other? No? It's probably about time anyway, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Scott. And I want to remind everyone. Well, go ahead.
Thank you.
And next week we have Dick Walker and Scott Drum, who will be talking about freight and freight issues in the Portland region. So we hope to see you there.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
We're done. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah. Pack up here.